Maxwell Hall's history as an iconic arts venue has largely been forgotten, but it retains legendary status among music fans lucky enough to see some of the world's biggest acts, including U2, Sir Paul McCartney, and Blondie. Some of the most talked about gigs remain those of local talent, including the Hollies, New Order, and the Smiths, who almost brought the house down. We invited people back to share their memories of Maxwell Hall.
This place you could fill with 1,000 students. You get 1,000 students in at 50p a ticket, you can afford a band for £500. That was the basic economics you worked to. Friday afternoon in February 1972, I was sat in Peel building. I had an office, as Ents officer, sitting there quietly, a bit fed up actually. I just had the presidential student union elections that week and I came second. So I thought, not very good, a bit of a downer. And a knock came on the door and a guy came up and said, can you put on a gig tonight? I said, a bit short nose, isn't it? He said, well, I've got Paul McCartney outside in his new band, Wings. I said, oh yeah? So he said, no, seriously. He said, come on, I'll take you out and meet them out. And I went out and there was a white van outside with Paul, Linda McCartney, a few kids and the dogs. And they just turned up. They'd been sent from Manchester University, who wouldn't put them on. And they said, we want to play here tonight and get as many people as you can. 50p a ticket, we'll split it 25p for us, 25p for the Students' Union, and we'll put on a concert. In the space of 2-3 hours, we managed to get 600 people in this hall. And Paul rocked up with his new band. He wanted a complete break from the Beatles, so no Beatles songs, and they'd only rehearsed about 11 tunes then. Old things like Lucille from Little Richard and stuff like that, and they didn't have enough to do a full set actually. So they had to ask for somebody to do some encores for them. And they did one for me on the basis of I didn't make president that year. So that was a very special thing. But coming into my final year, which was the second year doing Ents, I had the opportunity then to plan a year in advance. And I spent some time with Chrysalis. I went time in their offices in London looking at their bands and their up-and-coming bands. And we agreed some great deals. We had bands like Procol Harum who came here. 10 years after, Manfred Mann, and Black Sabbath were a new band, and they were a cheap second act that came on and turned out to be a kind of a global buster, didn't they, in the end? I can remember a quirk, actually. One of the bands that turned up was a guy called Arthur Brown, and he had a record, his hit was Fire, and he appeared on the stage with his hair sat on fire, riding a bicycle. It was new, it was exciting, it was a vibrant place. I loved rock music in those days as a teenager, and I thought coming somewhere like this would be very exciting. It seemed quite strange actually when I graduated, coming back to and sitting in a hall with for every 3 hours for students going out one by one to receive their graduation in all the gowns and everything. Quite different from a Friday night rock concert. So.
Maxwell Hall was opened by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in 1961. Over 60 years, Maxwell Hall has hosted hundreds of graduation ceremonies, conferences and events. Salford-born musician Peter Hook recalls first visiting with bandmate Barney Sumner in the days before they formed Joy Division and New Order.
Yeah, my first sort of introduction to this place, shall we say, the university, was with the Students' Union. Just after punk, Barney and I used to come in and drink because the beer was cheap, and the only problem was you had to be signed in, and if there was a gig on, you had to get a student to sign you in before you could even pay. And yeah, it was quite weird that we actually watched more bands here outside the window than we did inside because we could never get signed in. You know, we were punks, dog collars and all that crap, and you just didn't, nobody could relate to you at that time. I used to come here as a paying customer, right? It was before my glory days, if you like, when I was always on the guest list, and you know, you'd be, oh, it's Peter, oh, come on in, you know, all that crap. So the thing is that I enjoyed it in a very, very nice and natural way. And it was one of those weird things, you know, there were so many pubs on this stretch that this was a hell of a thriving place. You know, this place here is Chapel Street and Regent Road. They were very, very important cultural areas, you know. It was 1983-84 when we played, and I do remember that we went to Japan, touring for the first time straight after. So yeah, it looks good in the book, Salford, Tokyo. You know, we were on the up, I suppose you'd say. And oddly, it made a nice change from playing in the Hacienda. I mean, you know, the thing is that as Salford goes in this area, Maxwell Hall was the only place where you could go to see decent bands because of the size of the venue, you know, 500 capacity. It was lacking at that space, so it was always somewhere as a punk you aspired to. And you know, as we became up, obviously we played it, so it was on the circuit, and it was a great gig. Yeah, it attracted good people. It was a good hub because of where it is on Chapel Street. You know, the buses. This is a hub into Manchester. So yeah, it was all good. I have very good memories of it.
And no gig was bigger than that played by the Smiths come 1986. The show almost literally brought the house down and has been celebrated as one of the 10 best gigs of all time.
Oh, yes. Wow. I didn't realise the ceiling was so high. Wow, look at how low the stage is. Surprised it wasn't completely covered in people on the stage. I remember people were getting on the stage, but they weren't getting on stage to kind of get to the band. I think they were trying to get out, so just because it was getting pretty airy at the front in terms of the people, because I noticed that the crowd were moving around, but it was involuntarily. They weren't kind of moving and dancing. It was so packed, people couldn't even move. I remember somebody saying to me that they lost a shoe, and they couldn't bend down to pick it up because it was that tight in terms of the crowd. Yeah, well, I was here. That was my seat. I always say it's the best seat in the house because I get to see the band and the crowd, and nobody else does. Not from where I'm sitting anyway, that perspective. Oh, no wonder I enjoyed it coming out to a packed house like this. And it's a great sound as well. I should have brought a little drum and a pair of sticks. Played the intro to The Queen is Dead for you. There was a chant that went up, and I think it was, did Morrissey sing Salford, Salford? I think he did. Maybe I'm getting that wrong, but maybe I dreamt it. But I think he did, which obviously is quite an unusual thing for him to be chanting, sort of being a Manchester lad. So when we came here, and it was rammed to the gills of really ardent Smiths disciples, you know, we felt it from I'm getting goosebumps now talking about it. Felt it immediately that the whole thing was like, we've come home. It was like a homecoming gig, even though it wasn't our city. You know, it's strange. I think the first thing that I noticed, because I think this is a sprung dance floor, we had a PA that must have been kind of, I mean, it's higher than these speakers here now, so maybe about another 2 meters above that. And obviously they'd probably come out to about here. And huge boxes, and obviously on both sides. And when we came out and we started playing, both stacks of PA started to bow in like that with the crowd kind of, you know, bouncing along. And I thought, that's not right. And I remember my roadie, Rooster, at the time, Mark Cosby, I remember seeing him climbing up to the top and just laying on top of it, you know, to give it some weight, to stop it from falling. And I could see him, and I could see these guys running up, and that kind of took my mind off the gig a little bit, because I thought, what happens now? And it's not just because I'm here, but I remember this being my favourite gig that we ever played. because we played much bigger gigs, you know, obviously Glastonbury's pretty big, but, you know, we played more, I suppose, prestigious gigs, like Royal Albert Hall, sold that out. So it was my favourite gig, and in fact, I think it might be Johnny Marr's as well. Everything aligned and just felt like, yes, that's why I played drums in the first place, is to have an experience like that. Because you can't buy it, you always dream of it, and then to achieve it, it's quite unnerving, actually, because then, I suppose like being an astronaut and then go to the moon, what do you do after that? And that's what it felt like. It was just, well, okay, right, well, I enjoyed playing the drums, that was great, what's next? What shall I go and do now?
I think the Maxwell Hall should be here. It has a history, it has a great history. You know, it was very important in those gig days for music in Manchester and Salford. So the thing is, it should survive. And you know, when you're dealing with so many students every year, you've got a market here that is safe and is on their doorstep, and it should be used.